Welcome to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
Penix, quick snap, toss sweep left. Dylan Johnson angles left side, and he bounces into the end zone. Touchdown, Dylan Johnson. 13th rushing touchdown of the season. Lets out a lion of a yell, and the Huskies have a 9-0 lead in the Pac-12 championship here in the first quarter.
Win with the snap, turns, and hands it to Blue. Breaks free at the 50. Actually, that's Keelan Robinson down the sidelines. 40, 30, 20. They said he stepped out of bounds, or did he? He did not. Touchdown, Texas. Snap to Milroe. Jada look. He's got Miller wide open. 20, 15, 10, 5. Touchdown. Alabama takes the lead with 12:04 to go in the first half.
Shotgun for JJ from the 6-yard line. Takes the snap. Inside handoff. Blake Corum bounces it back the other direction. Blake fighting for the end zone. Touchdown, Wolverines. Blake Corum ties the school record with his 55th career rushing touchdown.
Shireman lets it go. His third triple of the first half. And their leading scorers starting to heat up here at PBA. And this was a dominant performance by Greg McDermott's team. And the Blue Jays with a 29-point victory against Nebraska.
This is a really good win for us because of what I think of Nebraska and Coach Hoiberg's team. I've been really impressed with how connected they are on both ends of the floor. For us to come in here and do this to them is really a credit to our guys' preparation and focus.
Good morning. Welcome in to Hurrdat Sports Radio here on a Monday morning. I'm Ravi Lulla. We are on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, and we're coming to you live from the Hurrdat Sports Bar and Grill, the H&H Chevrolet stage. As you may have noticed, I am riding solo this morning. Our guy Andrew Rogers is a bit under the weather, so he will not be in this morning. So it's just you, me, and Shane here this morning on the show. But we do have a terrific.
Why the f- is Shane walking in there?
We don't even know. We never know why Shane's walking where he's walking. Probably to go vape most of the time, if I had to guess.
Oh, come on, Shane.
But we do have a good show for you here this morning. Sam McKewon from the Omaha World-Herald joins us at 8 a.m. Damon Benning joins us at 8:30. He'll be with us for the bottom half of that hour. Ryan Fowler, he covers college football and NFL for the Bleacher Report. And then we will wrap up the show with Jacob Padilla to talk about Nebraska and Creighton basketball, as well as we'll see if we can get some volleyball takes out of him as well to wrap up the show. Of course, we'll also do the Warhorse Sportsbook sports cleanup as well. Speaking of Warhorse Sportsbook, you can reach us on the Warhorse Sportsbook hotline, 888-638-4876. If you feel bad for me, want to keep me a little company this morning, that is the best way to do it. You can also chime in on that YouTube channel like TK already has. TK says lots of madness to talk about. I mean, probably can't even make it to Creighton this morning. Well, we'll see what happens, TK. We'll see what happens with the show as we go along. But he's right. There is a ton of madness to talk about, and mad being the key word there for the Florida State Seminoles, as they are an undefeated conference champion, Power 5 team that has been left out of the college football playoff. At 13-0, Florida State drops a spot despite winning and is left on the outside looking in of the college football playoff. And listen,
hurt right now. You're gonna.
I'm actually not that upset about the Florida State part of it. What I'm upset about is that the SEC should have been shut out of the playoff, and they weren't. Whoever, ESPN, the committee, whoever, just could not help themselves. They couldn't fathom a world in which the SEC was not in the playoff. I could, and I loved it for, the 12 hours, 16 hours that it seemed like a possibility. The AP poll got it right. They had Florida State at 4 and Alabama at 5. Here's my real problem with the situation, okay? Because you could have the argument of best versus most deserving, which I'm sure we will at some point. You can have the argument about injuries and how Florida State's a different team than they were a month ago, and I'm sure we'll get to that at some point. But here's where the committee got it wrong. Is last week, when Jordan Travis was still injured, when Florida State was still undefeated, when Alabama still had the one loss, Texas still had the one loss, Georgia is the only team that lost out of that group, and they fell out. Florida State was still ahead of Alabama and Texas at that point. They were still ahead of Alabama and Texas when Jordan Travis was hurt. And listen, you can make the argument that, hey, Alabama really did a number on winning that Alabama game or winning that Georgia game in the SEC championship. You can make that argument, and I'll listen to it. That's the best win anybody's had this season is Alabama over Georgia. Here's where the problem comes in, and this is why the committee did it, and it's a stupid reason, okay? Number one, Texas, if you think that's the best win of the season, you say, hey, Alabama deserves to be in the playoff because they have the best win anybody had this season. Their one loss is not a bad loss, and they won a conference title. I can hear that argument. That makes sense to me. You can bump them 4 spots, which is what happened. They went from 8 to 4. You can make that bump because of that. Sure. It's a lot, but sure. Here's where you end up in trouble. Is Texas's win over Oklahoma State with a starter at quarterback and whatever else is not better than Florida State's win over Louisville. It's just not. Louisville was better than Oklahoma State. Louisville was a better football team than Oklahoma State. So Texas got bumped 4 spots for winning against a worse team. And yes, they did it in more impressive fashion. Okay, whatever. They got bumped 4 spots. You're telling me a 28-point win over a worse Oklahoma State team is more impressive than a Florida State win over a better football team with a third-string quarterback, by the way. You're telling me that 18 extra points margin of victory is worth 4 spots in the college football playoff? And the answer is no, it's obviously not. But here's where you run into a problem, because Alabama probably deserved to be in the college football playoff more than Texas. But Texas had the head-to-head win. And so to get themselves out of these mental gymnastics of having to say, hey, Alabama is better than Texas right now, but Texas beat them earlier in the season, but that was a long time ago, and whatever, trying to do these hurdles and mentally to try and get you to a place where you can put Alabama over Texas without a head-to-head win.
Texas is a powerful player.
Instead, they weasel their way out of that conversation by just leaving Florida State out, who, oh, by the way, still undefeated, still a conference champion, still had a better win on conference championship weekend than Texas did, and did it all with the third-string quarterback. Oh, and by the way, held a Louisville offense that had been really good all year to basically nothing. And won a game when everybody knew that their quarterback could not throw. Won a game where they had to run Wildcat, not because they wanted to, but out of necessity. You're telling me that is more impressive, or that's less impressive than Texas going out and beating a worse Oklahoma State team? I don't buy it. I'm just not going to buy it. And Corey chimes in on the YouTube stream. I never let myself believe the committee would actually leave the SEC out. And listen, that's fair. Maybe I'm too much of a bright-eyed optimist. But it was the right thing to do, because here's what you've told us about college football playoff committee. I'm sure you're listening. Is that the wins and losses don't actually matter. That's what you're saying here, is the wins and losses don't actually matter. Florida State went out and won every single game on their schedule. And you decided, that doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Because we think Texas was a little bit more impressive. We think Alabama was a little bit more impressive. Going out and winning every game on your schedule doesn't matter. That's the lesson we learned from this. And listen, I'd actually be okay if last week or the week before, whenever Jordan Travis had gotten hurt, because they did this initially, where they dropped Florida State out of the top 4. But then Ohio State lost to Michigan, so Florida State jumped back up into the top 4 after that game. I actually would have been okay if they had just left Florida State lower and said, hey, with the injury, with the lack of Jordan Travis, we think Alabama and Texas are better than these teams. But they didn't do that. They left Ohio State right behind Florida State. And they left Texas and Alabama at 7 and 8 respectively. It's like these people don't have the cognitive ability to look ahead a week and say, hey, we might end up in a situation where we think Texas and Alabama are better than Florida State. Maybe we should put the rankings this week in such a way that decision would actually make sense. But I don't know. I don't know who all is in that room. I suppose I could look it up. But I'm guessing that there's the same type of people that are in most rooms making most decisions. Oh, yeah, I was right. It's a bunch of like octogenarians in that room that probably don't have the cognitive ability to actually think a week ahead of time. I mean, it looks like I'm looking at Congress right now with all of these old white dudes in front of on the committee here, not like 90-year-olds making decisions about the future that they don't have to deal with. This is a committee that I like. That's the part that I don't understand. Is if you thought this was a possibility, which everyone knew, by the way, everyone knew Jordan Travis was out for the year. Everyone knew that there was a chance that Florida State wasn't going to be as good as their resume by the end of the season. So why didn't the rankings reflect that when you knew it? Florida State was still ahead of Texas. Florida State was still ahead of Alabama when this all happened. That's the fact of the matter. I'm upset because of what the College Football Playoff Committee told me was true last week. Because you're not going to see Brock Glenn a month from now, the third-string quarterback. Tate Rodemaker's injury isn't season-ending the way Jordan Travis's is. And look, I get Tate Rodemaker is not Jordan Travis, but they looked better offensively with Tate Rodemaker because he's not a true freshman getting thrown into a championship game. Not everybody can be Tua Tagovailoa. That's the part that doesn't make any sense. Is if this was true, it would have been true last week as well. It can't all of a sudden just now be true. That doesn't make any sense.
Hear the words.
Thomas on TK on YouTube says FSU is being punished for not lying about Jordan Travis's injury. If FSU said he would be back for the playoff, the committee would have had to put him in, punished for doing everything right. Corey says everyone who says expanding the playoffs will devalue the regular season can shut up now. Yeah, Corey's right. And so is TK. Although I will say, I'm not sure how much Florida State could have lied about the injury because Jordan Travis's foot was pointed the wrong direction. So that would have been tough to lie about because that can only be so many things. If your foot is pointed the wrong direction, they could have tried to lie about it. They could have tried to pull on Aaron Rodgers and be like, hey, I'll be back in 15 minutes. It's fine. Which, by the way, now all of a sudden they're starting to hedge. They're like, oh, well, if the Jets aren't in playoff contention, he's probably not going to play. Oh, really? He had a torn Achilles. He wasn't going to play anyway, geniuses. Like, if it actually was a torn Achilles. Now, they might have lied about that on the front end. But if it was a completely torn Achilles the way he was talking about it, that dude was never going to play. And as far as Corey is talking about, yeah, the regular season, the committee just told us, and maybe they were trying to prepare us mentally for the regular season not mattering anymore, which, thank you for doing the Lord's work, committee, in telling us that, oh, yeah, it's okay. The regular season doesn't matter actually that much. We just need you to understand we're kind of going to do whatever we want here. So appreciate that, committee. But Corey's right. Anybody who's like, oh, the regular season's devalued, it's like, well, Florida State won all their games and they didn't get a go anyway. So maybe the regular season was already devalued. Maybe the regular season's devalued for everybody that doesn't play in the SEC. Terrence chimes in. The system was trash from, I think he meant the jump. 5 major conferences and 4 spots. There's always one, sometimes 2 conferences left out. Terrence, that's fair. Usually, though, it was the Pac-12 because the Pac-12 was such trash for most of this last decade to the point where their league is not going to exist next year. But you're right. Having 4 spots for 5 major conferences never made sense. It was designed to create outrage. And I think it was designed because that was the highest number that all these octogenarians could decide on for a playoff. It's the same reason it's 12 instead of 16. It should be 16, but it's the same reason it's 12. 12 is the number that makes the least amount of sense. It should be 8 or it should be 16, but it's 12 instead. So, yeah, it's the highest number that the egomaniacs running this thing could agree on. And so we ended up with 4. And because college football moves at a glacial pace, we're like, oh, it's progress. We were in the bowl system not that long ago. Oh, and isn't it better than the BCS? It's like it's like if you are in a relationship with somebody. That's right, Bo. The BCS. That's why they make that call. It's like when you're in a relationship with somebody and they're not actively mean to you the way your ex was, and you're like, oh, don't I treat you so much better than your ex? It's like, well, you still don't treat me well. You still aren't nice to me. You're just not actively mean. That doesn't mean it's a good relationship. It means it's just slightly less toxic. It's like, yes, the college football playoff is better than the BCS. That doesn't mean it's a good system. It just means it's slightly less toxic.
It's flickering.
Thomas says he thinks it's worse than the BCS. Well, I don't know about that. Yeah, and TK makes a good point. Funny, no one talks about Michigan cheating anymore. We forget the whole Connor Stallions thing. We're just, Michigan doesn't get penalized for cheating for the last 3 years, but Florida State gets penalized for having a quarterback break his leg in half. I don't know. It doesn't make a ton of sense to me. On an unrelated note, Brian chimes in, and I haven't seen this come out yet, so I don't know if it's true or not, but Brian on the YouTube channel says McCord is in the portal. I'm not sure if that's true or not. I haven't seen it yet, but if that's accurate, Kyle McCord in the transfer portal would be really interesting. TK says playoff makes more money. BCS provided a consistently good game. Yeah, I suppose what I mean is the 4-team format is better than the 2-team format, but I'm not necessarily saying that the college football playoff committee is a better way of selecting than the BCS was. I think most years the BCS got it right. Terrence said McCord confirmed. Sounds like there's a mass exodus from Ohio State. So we are planning to talk about the transfer portal in later in the hour here. Today is actually, I know we've been hearing about guys entering the portal for about a week, but there is actually the portal opening today. Officially, people can be in the portal. So over the break, I'll do my due diligence here and start figuring out who's in, who's out, and Arch Manning is trending. What does that mean? The Arch Manning thing is funny because one of those guys is definitely leaving. Like, whether it's Malik Murphy or Arch Manning, one of those guys is leaving because Quinn Ewers is coming back. And I could actually see a world in which they both leave. With Quinn Ewers coming back, neither of those guys signed up for that. Neither of those guys signed up for the fourth year of Quinn Ewers. Everyone assumed he'd go to the NFL. Both of those guys certainly are not sitting for another year. So that's an interesting situation there as well. As we anticipated, Cam Ward from Washington State in the transfer portal as well. We'll get you up to date on those here in a few minutes as we continue on, and I have a chance to check the latest breaking transfer portal news on Twitter. But I know people think I'm mad because I like Florida State, and I do like Florida State. I'm not mad because of Florida State, because listen, I have no misconceptions about them winning a national title this year, especially without Jordan Travis. I didn't think they could win a national title this year with Jordan Travis.
You're mad.
What I'm mad about is the inconsistency of the college football playoff rankings. Jordan Travis was hurt last week too. Florida State was still number 4. Really nothing changed except Alabama beat Georgia, so they flipped spots. And then the committee got scared about putting Alabama in when Texas had a head-to-head win over them. Texas didn't do enough to earn a spot this week. If you thought they were good enough, they were good enough the week before. But instead, they were at 7 and 8, respectively, between Texas and Alabama. That's the thing that doesn't make any sense here. That's the thing that should be maddening to everyone. Because last week they told us, I'm just going back based on what the committee told us. Last week they told us Florida State's still good enough with a backup quarterback. And what changed from one week to the next? Because all I found out is, Florida State's still good enough with their third string quarterback. That's what I found out. That's what changed for me. That's the part that's infuriating, is the lack of self-awareness, the lack of consistency, and the lack of thinking forward just a single week to say, hey, what problems could arise by putting Texas and Alabama 7 and 8 this week?
Hey.
You could have put Florida State at 5 last week, maybe even 6, and people would have understood. Like, that's the Jordan Travis effect. He's been out. You don't feel good about that. You've got to penalize them for Jordan Travis being out. But they didn't get penalized. They didn't get penalized for Jordan Travis being out until they went in and it was time to make the actual playoff. Coming up next, we will talk some transfer portal. We're going to try and confirm some of these quarterbacks heading into the portal. Dave and Travis piping in as well. We will get to all your comments on YouTube, on Twitter, and of course, you can call us at 888-638-4876. More Hurrdat Sports Radio coming up next.
We will be back. 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 You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
Feely with Campbell to his right, takes a snap, delayed run, running right, lowers his shoulder, he fights, he scratches, he claws, into the end zone. Lawrence Feely, a two-play answer. Touchdown, Florida State.
Plummer back to pass again, a little more time, now giving ground back at the 20, and pulled down to the 18-yard line. Guess who? Our old buddy Brandon Frisky just got to him again.
Welcome back to Hurrdat Sports Radio here on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. I'm Ravi Lulla. We're live from the H&H Chevrolet stage at Hurrdat Sports Bar and Grill, riding solo this morning as we tackle all of the college football news coming down the pipe today. Transfer portal opens. Obviously, we've got the college football playoff committee nonsense. As we were talking before the break, Kyle McCord is in the transfer portal, along with, it looks like, about at least half a dozen other of his teammates. You've got a couple of cornerbacks in the group from Ohio State that are leaving. Evan Pryor, the running back, leaving as well. It's a pretty large group. Ryan Turner, corner from Ohio State, in the portal. You've got Jair Brown in the portal as well. Ohio State safety Kyle Stokes in the portal as well. Lots of portal news all over the place for the Ohio State Buckeyes. I'm sure we will have more as the day wears on. Hopping back in that YouTube comment section, which can always be dangerous, but we appreciate you guys being in there. Wrapping up the conversation, I'm sure we'll talk about it throughout the show, but Corey says the SEC's best non-con win was Kentucky over Louisville by 7. The same Louisville team FSU beat by 10 with their third-string quarterback. That's a fair point, Corey, but why would we use logic and reason in this situation when we can just fly by the seat of our pants and not make any sense at all? That makes way too much sense, Corey. Oh, by the way, Florida State went out in their non-con and beat the brakes off of LSU. So I guess that doesn't matter. LSU, that was top 5 in the country to start the season. And part of the large reason they weren't top 5 in the country moving forward was because of Florida State beating the brakes off of them. We're just going to ignore that part with the SEC supremacy story. That's fine. Let's just go ahead and ignore that. We will get to Dave asks in the YouTube stream as well, do we think Nebraska will move fast on a quarterback or take their time? I imagine this is a take their time situation, Dave. I don't know that Nebraska is going to be in the high stakes bidding portion of the quarterback portal. I don't think they're probably going to be in on the Riley Leonards, the Will Howards, the Cam Wards of the world. I do look at a guy like DJ Uiagalelei as an interesting option because I think he will have options, but I also think quite a bit of the shine from DJU is off a little bit, even though I thought he was pretty solid this year for a good Oregon State team. A guy like that is interesting to me for Nebraska because he does have 2 years of eligibility left, and he is pretty much a ready-to-go starter for whoever he ends up choosing. That's a guy that's interesting to me because of the eligibility. And then I mentioned this last week. If you're looking for a 1-year instant impact guy, Grayson McCall from Carolina, Coastal Carolina is really interesting to me as well. That's a guy that I could see Nebraska being interested in. But outside of that, I think you're going to be looking kind of down the list a little bit, maybe at some younger guys, some guys that have some development years in them. And I just don't know that Nebraska is going to be in on the bidding war for the top of that quarterback transfer class, which now includes Kyle McCord. It'll be interesting to see who else enters the portal today. I still think, I mentioned this in the last segment, I think Arch Manning or Malik Murphy or both will end up in the transfer portal. I do not think all three of him, of Manning, Ewers, and Murphy will all be at Texas next year. It doesn't make any sense at all for all three of those guys to still be there. And Ewers has already said he's coming back from not going to the NFL, that he's coming back. And he's the starter, so he's not going anywhere. So Malik Murphy or Arch Manning, I would have to imagine, are going to be in the portal. Obviously, they're going to be hot commodities, especially Arch Manning, who was the top recruit in the country last year. Speaking of some of the top recruits in the country, you've got a couple guys from the last couple classes. Depending on where you look, the top-rated player from the 2022 class, Walter Nolan from Texas A&M, is in the transfer portal. We talked about this last week, but the number 2 player in the 2023 class, quarterback Dante Moore, a 5-star who was at UCLA, has announced his intentions to enter the transfer portal. So you've got some high-level guys there, not just at quarterback, but at those other positions as well. It's going to get pretty wacky here as the portal officially opens today in the next few minutes. It's going to get pretty weird. So we'll see. I don't know. We'll see what happens here. But if I had to guess, I don't think Nebraska is going to be in the bidding war that Nebraska is going to be in the bidding war for a quarterback. Now, Travis says on the YouTube channel that he heard Nebraska met with Will Howard. It's possible. I don't this time of year it's really hard to know what's true and what's not about who meets with who and who ends up being, who ends up actually. It's all very clandestine is what I mean to say in the transfer portal and meeting and stuff like that, especially if Nebraska has already met with Will Howard. That would mean it either happened really, really early this morning or before he was actually in the portal, which gets a little dicey there as well. So I just don't know about the veracity of, and I'm sure it happens, right? But it's hard to nail anything down because there is some gray areas there as people are entering the portal but not in the portal yet. And, it's kind of when you're separated but you're not divorced yet. Like, are you allowed to date? I don't know. That's some of the gray area here in the transfer portal. Corey also mentions I'd love Grayson McCall. I would too. I think he'd actually be a really good fit. He's a terrific decision maker. I think he'd be a really good fit with the offense that Satterfield's trying to run. He's mobile enough, but he's not a true runner. The decision making at Coastal Carolina with Jamie Chadwell previously or in years previous to this, I think he's a good, quick decision maker. So that's going to be a guy that I think to keep an eye on. Nate calling in on the Warhorse Sportsbook hotline. Wants to talk about the college football playoffs. Nate, what's going on, man?
Hey, what's going on, man? How you doing this morning?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, man. So what you think about the playoff selection?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's terrible, if I'm being honest. And it's not, for me, the biggest issue is the lack of consistency from week to week, right? Because Jordan Travis didn't get hurt against Louisville.
Right.
That would make sense
right.
if they dropped him after he gets hurt in that game, right? But he got hurt a few weeks
right.
ago. Like, you knew he was hurt last week when you still had Florida State in that number 4 spot. And you still had
who would you take off then?
I would take Alabama off.
Oh no, come on, man.
Well, listen,
come on, man.
Listen, hear me out, Nate. I would personally take Alabama off. It's mostly because I think it'd be funny to see the SEC left out. But
come on, man.
Hear me out. I can understand an argument for Alabama over Texas. I don't think the committee had the stones to put Alabama in when Texas had a head-to-head win. Because Alabama has a better resume than Texas. They do.
You don't go through the SEC undefeated and get left off the playoff. Who has Michigan played this year, man? Come on.
That's a fair point, and they are cheaters, so let's take Michigan out. I'm okay with that.
And what about Washington? The Pac-12 is weak, man.
The Pac-12 was good this year. Come on, Nate. The Pac-12 was really good this year.
Good how? They had Oregon and who else?
Oregon was really good. Utah was good. Oregon State was good.
Utah.
Dude, Utah was good. Come on. Utah would beat up on a lot. Utah would beat up on a lot of Big Ten teams. Even with that.
Talking about the Utes?
Yes, the Utes would beat up on a lot of Big Ten teams, especially even with their quarterback. Man, the Utes would have got undefeated in the Big Ten West. Come on, man.
Oh, come on, man.
The Big Ten West,
yeah,
I don't know how much the Big Ten West means, but Nate, we got to hit a break here. We appreciate the call, man.
All right, thanks for taking the call, man.
That's Nate on the Warhorse Sportsbook hotline. Coming up next, we will wrap up the first hour. Still lots of college football stuff to get here. Transfer portal, coaching carousel, all of it and more here on Hurrdat Sports Radio.
We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
From the left hash mark, 3rd down and 4, handoff. Baxter flips it back. Ewers throws downfield, wide open. J.T. Sanders caught. Touchdown, Texas. How about a little trickeration for you? That one goes for a 24-yard score.
Welcome back as we wrap up hour number 1 here on the Hurrdat Sports Radio. I'm Ravi Lulla. Shane Schilberg producing for me. We're live on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. We're live from the H&H Chevrolet stage here at Hurrdat Sports Bar and Grill. And we are knee deep in transfer portal season as we mostly look at quarterbacks, but there's a ton of other players, including, as I mentioned earlier, Walter Nolan, defensive lineman, who was the top prospect in the country, according to some services from Texas A&M. He hops in the portal as well. It is a wild time here in college football, and we will try and keep track as I scroll Twitter.
Well, you got the portal, you got head coaches moving everywhere, you got playoffs. I mean, this is a great time for college football.
It's kind of like the NBA offseason where sometimes people get a little bit more jazzed up about the storylines and the movement and everything than people do actually about the games themselves.
Well, we got 43 bowl games coming up, so I mean, we got that to look forward to, the games themselves.
I mean, I don't know how many of those bowl games people actually look forward to, but there certainly will be 43 of them, which is a lot, and Nebraska is playing in 0 of them, unfortunately. We've got a little fight breaking out in the YouTube comment section, so that's always fun. So I'm trying to wade through that and get to actual content here. One comment that I saw earlier, and I apologize, I don't remember who it's from, was somebody talking about Willie Fritz taking the Houston job. Tulane head coach Willie Fritz, who is unbelievably good at his job. Just a terrific football coach. A little bit older, as he has taken his sweet time kind of going through his coaching career. But he's been a head coach for a pretty long time, just not always at the highest of levels. He started off as a head coach at Blinn College, which, if that name sounds familiar to you, it's because that's the JUCO that Cam Newton went to when he transferred from Florida before he ended up at Auburn. But he's been from Blinn College to Central Missouri to Sam Houston State to Georgia Southern to Tulane, and now he will be in Houston. But he has been a winner every single place that he has gone. Just an outstanding football coach by any measurement, and has turned this Tulane team, which was destitute when he took over, and he has gotten them. Last year they were in the top 10 nationally. This year they're 11-2 overall. He will take over at Houston. That's a terrific hire for Houston as they start to navigate the Big 12. Some of the other coaching spots that got filled up, Boise State removed the interim tag from Spencer Danielson. They had fired their coach earlier in the season, and Danielson was their defensive coordinator. They had fired Andy Avalos about a few weeks ago. And Danielson led them well in that interim, and they got to the Mountain West Conference title in that one as well. Danielson just 35 years old, so that's a nice young hire for Boise State, and as they try to kind of recapture some of their magic from earlier in the last, I guess, decade or so. But there's only 2 Power 5 jobs currently open, and Vanderbilt certainly is Power 5 in name only. That's a tough job and a really challenging place to navigate. That's just the offensive coordinator is out at Vanderbilt. So just Duke is available for Power 5 conferences. I apologize, I misread that. But just Duke is available in the Power 5 head coaching because Mike Elko left for Texas A&M. And a guy that we were talking about a little bit earlier when Grace McCall came up was Jamie Chadwell, who was previously at Coastal Carolina, currently at Liberty in his first year there. I think Jamie Chadwell is a really interesting person to look at for that Duke job. He's obviously very familiar with the area, been super successful, runs a unique offense that I think would help Duke because you don't have to go out and get the same type of guys that everybody else is getting in terms of trying to, there's this line in Moneyball where Brad Pitt as Billy Beane is talking about playing against the Yankees. And he basically says, hey, if we try and do this like everybody else, then or the line is they're in the scouting room. And he goes, if we try to play like the Yankees in here, we'll lose to the Yankees out there. Basically saying, if we do the same thing everybody else does when we're buying players and signing players and scouting players, they're better at that than we are because they have more money. They can always sign the better player because they have more money. So you have to do things differently in the collection of players in order to beat teams that are better at that traditional method of collecting players than you are. So the reason I bring that up with Duke and Jamie Chadwell is Duke is a challenging job. Duke is a place that it's pretty difficult to consistently get a high level of talent. They don't have a ton of tradition. They're very academically challenging. It's a difficult job to consistently win at. And David Cutcliffe did a really good job. Mike Elko did a really good job. But I think there's value in maybe not going the full service academy model, but doing something in the sense of being different so that you don't have to go out and try and get a Riley Leonard every year. Riley Leonard being at Duke is kind of an outlier. They usually don't have that level of quarterback at a place like Duke. And they're not going to have him at Duke anymore because he's transferring probably to Notre Dame, it sounds like. So I think Jamie Chadwell would be a really good fit at Duke for those reasons. I think he would give them the opportunity to remain competitive without going like a full Paul Johnson to Georgia Tech triple option model there. He gives you unique looks without making it unattractive for certain prospects to play there.
Well, and the football team isn't number one on the totem pole either. I mean, if you think about it that way.
Yeah,
they're playing second fiddle.
Yeah, it's a basketball school first and foremost, always will be. There is never in a million years will basketball not be the number one priority at Duke, similar to Indiana, a job that another guy that we like, Kurt Signetti, took earlier in this hiring cycle. So that to me is the job opening that I'm most interested at looking at. Another guy that I think could get some run that we haven't talked a ton about, and I'll have to ask our guy Adam McClintock what their models look like on this guy. But Rhett Lashley at SMU. SMU just won their first conference title since the death penalty. This is the first time they've won a conference title in almost, I think it was 1984, almost 40 years. He's only got 2 years as a head coach, both at SMU. He went 7-6 last year, 11-2 this year. They won their conference title. They're moving into the ACC next year, so I'm not sure how appealing other jobs would necessarily be. If I'm not mistaken, SMU has a ton of money because they're a very well-off private school. So he's got kind of like Jamie Chadwell. He's got a lot of resources for a school that's relatively small or smaller in terms of profile. And so that's an interesting guy to keep an eye on as well. If for some reason, there's been some speculation. I don't think this is actually going to happen, although I don't know. There's been some speculation of a guy like Ryan Day maybe wanting to move on. Not that I think that Lashley would get the Ohio State job, but a job like that opening up creates a pretty large domino effect. And so that would cause some interesting things for a guy like Rhett Lashley or a guy like Jamie Chadwell, where I think some of those higher profile jobs might be a little more interesting. Although, like I said, SMU heading to the ACC, although the College Football Playoff Committee apparently treating the ACC like a group of 5 school anyway, because it doesn't matter if you go undefeated and win your conference championship if you're Florida State, who, by the way, is a blue blood and, a national power, but that's okay. They've got treated like a group of 5 team anyway. So maybe SMU maybe Rhett Lashley at SMU will rethink his place on the totem pole with SMU going to the ACC as well. We'll try and keep up to date on the transfer portal. Lots of stuff. I haven't seen any news about Nebraska yet. Don't expect a ton of Nebraska guys to enter the portal, at least not guys of consequence, but we will keep you up to date on that. Coming up next, Sam McKewon from the Omaha World-Herald.
We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio. Here is the sports editor for the Omaha World-Herald, Sam McKewon.
That's fine. That's fine. That's fine.
Sam McKewon.
We're gonna throw the ball, and you just stand back there and throw it where you want to go. That kind of thing.
Sam McKewon.
Are you guys going? Sure.
Now, Sam McKewon.
Kicking off hour number 2 here on Hurrdat Sports Radio with AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. We are with Sam McKewon on the Warhorse Sportsbook Hotline. Sam, how are you this morning?
I'm good. How are you guys?
We are doing all right. It is just me this morning riding solo, so I appreciate you keeping me company here. Let's start with the college football playoff committee. I know you had some thoughts just kind of going through your Twitter yesterday. Seemed like people took your takes maybe a little bit the wrong way in regards to FSU and how you thought this process was going to play out. So just wanted to give you a minute here to kind of explain in more than 240 characters what you meant by the 4 best teams and FSU not really being in that group.
Yeah, I didn't write them well enough, and so that was my fault. No, here's the thing. You kind of knew going into the week that, you know, Florida State was in trouble. And I actually posted something on Friday saying, you know, if Washington loses by 3, and they almost did lose by 3, and Florida State wins by 7, and Florida State won by 10, who's the number 4 team? And to be very honest with you, more people pick Florida State, but I honestly thought that was in play. What I didn't think was in play was Georgia losing. I was surprised by that. I thought Georgia would win by 10 or 14 points, but Georgia played poorly and doesn't belong in the playoff. And, you know, what you saw during the week and then on Saturday, you saw the SEC leaning very hard on this, Sesame Street, one of these things is not like the other argument about how the SEC champion, regardless of who it is, needs to be in the the college football playoff. And you just didn't see any of that from the ACC. And I guess I feel very confident that Florida State believed it was in, after if they won. And that not only that, they would have been the number 3 seed if they won and another team in front of them lost. And so I thought what needed to have happened, what Florida State needed to understand is their AD and their president and their head coach and the ACC needed to really lobby to be in, and to do that on national TV to pre-shame the committee and to be very vociferous and strong about that statement. ESPN's college football reporter, doesn't matter who it is, but their college football playoff reporter predicted that Florida State on Saturday night, after all the games were over, would finish 6th. And I posted that. And what I thought in that moment is there's no way ESPN would let this reporter go on here and say that if they didn't feel really confident that Florida State wasn't going to make it. This wouldn't let it happen because it would be such an incorrect prediction.
Sure.
To predict somebody 6th and then finish 4th or 3rd. I'm like, there's just no way. And so I'm like, Florida State's in real trouble. And they were. They didn't make it. I didn't think they would make it. And as a result, they got really upset on Sunday, and it was too late. You got to say all the hard things before the votes are made. Scott Frost did that back in '98 after the Orange Bowl. You got to do it right away. You can't wait for people to decide and then be mad. This thing, unfortunately, is a human decision. There's virtually no metrics or firm or fast process. They change the rankings all the time for very, squishy reasons, narrative reasons. So you have to know going into it, hey, we're not going to make this thing unless we make a very strong case to the people in that room who are listening and make sure that they know that if we don't get in, we're gonna raise a lot of heck. And Florida State can do that after the fact, but it just doesn't carry the same weight. And so, do I think Florida State should have made it? Yes, I do. Alabama didn't deserve to make it in 2017, and Alabama doesn't deserve to make it now. The Alabama that beat Georgia is the same Alabama that should have lost to Auburn. Alabama's not been that good this year. They just haven't been. And Florida State's been just as good. And they have no losses. So, yes. The other thing I'll say is, and this is also true, so 2 things can be true at once. Florida State belongs in the playoffs, but Alabama will be a much more exciting playoff matchup for Michigan. And I think Michigan will win that game, but everybody knows that at 4 o'clock on whatever, January 1st, we're all sitting there and the Rose Bowl comes on. Your blood's going to get pumping more for Alabama than it is Florida State. It just is. You're going to get 5 million more viewers as a result. That's what Alabama and Michigan will do to each other. Saban against Harbaugh, that whole thing. It's going to be a big deal. And I don't know that the playoff committee was thinking about that, but two things can be true at once, and that's true. Florida State belonged in. Alabama is the more, interesting choice in terms of television. That's, those are both true. But no, I think Florida State should have been in the playoff, but the committee doesn't have to do that. And guess what? After this year, they don't have to be controversial anymore. They can just put whoever, they can put whoever they want in and the end.
Sam, so some really interesting points in there. And first, I guess I just want to ask, like, this is a bad way to decide who makes the playoff, right? Like if the who makes it in and who doesn't make it in can be decided by basically campaigning, like that's not the best way to decide, right? Like, is that fair?
Oh, I mean, it's not the NFL, or it's not professional sports. It's collegiate sports is trickier because there's more teams, and they all kind of play by different rules. And one day, if there's a college football super league, then maybe they'll have rules like the NFL. In the NCAA basketball tournament, there's so many teams, you got to win so many games that nobody's going to get too upset. The team that's left out is the 65th team. Number 1 seed versus number 2 seed. You know what? You got to win 5 games. You got to win 4 games just to get to you got to win 3 games just to get to the Elite 8 anyway. The most controversial thing that I think's ever happened in the NCAA tournament in recent years is the year that they made Kentucky and Massachusetts face each other in the Final Four instead of the final game, because they were busy screwing around with regions and other things. And they fixed that, where, if they fixed it. And so, the national title game isn't in the Final Four, it's in the final game. So that was probably the worst thing that happened, and they fixed it. Although, again, if that happened today, that'd feel pretty darn egregious, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
So, no, it's not a perfect way. That'll change a little bit when it goes to 12 teams. But it's been imperfect from the very beginning. Like, the thing was better when it was 2. No, people don't like hearing that. But it was better when it was 2. If it were 2, we would know the 2. And nobody would be saying, well, now Florida State belongs in over Washington. Nobody'd be saying
Sure, yeah.
It was better when it was 2. It was clear, and it created less, anger and frustration and all these other things. It made for better bowl matchups. One thing that's going to continue during the CFP is we're going to have to drag a team like Liberty into this thing, and that's silly. That's silly. The day when it gets to a college football super league is going to be a better day, because now nobody really cares. Liberty's probably going to play Oregon. They might even beat Oregon. Oregon doesn't care. But you get in a playoff setting, and those things are going to start ended up, 55-3. It's going to get real ugly with those group of 5 teams, because they won't stand a chance. They won't. And so, there's all these compromises that are built into the thing, and it's still imperfect, but it'll be better, next year. And nobody will say, well, Florida State will be the 5 seed. Nobody will care. They'll complain a little bit, but they'll have an opportunity to prove it. It'd be Florida State against Liberty. Oh boy, everybody will be fine. So, and then they'll get to play Alabama in a bowl game, and then they can prove that they're better than Alabama. In these circumstances, they don't get to prove that. It's unfortunate. Campaigning isn't the answer, but that's not. I mean, that's just part of how it's done. Why is the SEC commissioner using Sesame Street? Because he knows that somewhere in there they need to go and make a rhetorical argument. The ACC is just silent, because I think the ACC thought, if Florida State wins, they're in. And guess what? If Georgia beats Alabama, they're right. Florida State would have stayed ahead of Texas. The only reason that, and remember, Florida State was ahead of Texas last week. Florida State had a backup quarterback last week. The only reason that Texas jumped Florida State was because Alabama had to jump Florida State to put an SEC team in, and Texas beat Alabama.
Well, so that's the problem right there, right?
It happened. It was all about the SEC. It had nothing to do with Texas. Texas was tethered to Alabama because they beat Alabama. If Georgia beats Alabama, then Florida State is in the college football playoff, regardless of what Texas.
And that's the problem right there, right? Is that they left Florida State ahead of those two teams even after the backup quarterback situation was clear, right? Like, to me, that's the biggest. Like, had they dropped Florida State last week and be like, hey, we don't think this is the same thing without Jordan Travis, I don't think we're having this same conversation today, because that sort of makes sense. What I think made less sense is, hey, Florida State continued to win not only with a backup, but also a third string, had a better win than Texas, and then fell behind them at that point. Like, I think that's the part that gets frustrating with how the committee operated on this one, right? Like, if there was objective metrics, even like a net rating, like the basketball system uses, or even like a BCS-esque portion of the rating, I think that would have helped quite a bit, don't you?
Yeah, I do. But they've done that many times. I mean, Ohio State was number one in the playoff in 2019 until they mysteriously switched, right before the title, right before the playoff. LSU moves to number one because their defense got better. I mean, come on. This has happened so many times. It honestly, it happened the first year. And that was kind of the Big 12's fault when they wouldn't declare TCO the Big 12 champion because they didn't, they're busy looking at each other and they don't know what to do. And so, they declare a tie, and then, the committee, Barry Alvarez and Tom Osborne were part of it. We're like, well, you didn't say who the champion was. So Ohio State wins the national title. So it justifies it, but, that was a darn good TCU team that got left out. Florida State was undefeated that year and got in, and then they get crushed by Oregon in the Rose Bowl. And so, it's been there from the start. Penn State didn't make it that one year, and Ohio State did, even though Penn State beat Ohio State. Alabama didn't beat anybody in 2017, didn't even win their division. They go to the playoff, and then they win it. Again, you can do this all day with Georgia and Alabama. Their power ratings suggest they will win, a game or whatever you want to call it. You can put them in every single year if that's what you want to do. You can do the same with Clemson. Florida State has the misfortune of Clemson having a bad year.
Yeah,
they can control Clemson, and so it's those are hard things. I will say this: I didn't listen to a ton of the rhetoric yesterday from the CFP leader. Because Florida State's response was related to results on the field over some predicted measurement of winning and losing. And I was like, they didn't actually say that during their press conference or their interview that, well, we just don't think Florida State would beat Michigan. I don't think they didn't say that.
Not that I heard. I think it was more them kind of extrapolating some of the things that the playoff committee did say. Basically, I think they said something about like competitiveness or something to that extent. If I'm remembering right here. And so I think Florida State extrapolated to say, oh, well, you don't think that we could have beat Michigan, so you left us out, basically is how they took it.
Right. So, there's a lot of different ways to parse it out. It's going to go to 12. 2 was better than 4. 12 will be better than 4. 4 was too small. It kept teams out. But it kept 2 or 3 teams out that were no better or worse than the 4th.
Right.
And 2 was about perfect because you could usually pick the 2 best teams year after year.
Most years.
Those are the 2 best teams.
Yeah.
But, that wasn't that hard. And for whatever, they wanted to move it to 4. There's, the media wanted that. They eventually got it to 4. And then, the Big Ten and other leagues fought expansion. And now we're finally getting to expansion. So here we go. And it's going to be a lot of fun. next year, the conversations we will be having are, which teams are on the fringe of 12. And that'll be a heck of a lot of fun because there's a lot of teams that will be in contention for 12 at the start of November. And we'll see how it all shakes out.
Yeah, ironically, I think 8's probably the right number, but we just skipped right over that one.
We did,
which is about on par for college football, if we're being honest.
Right.
Let's change gears here to college basketball. Obviously, Nebraska and Creighton had their big matchup yesterday. Creighton wins 89-60. As you're watching that one and seeing it play out, obviously it was much more competitive at the start of the game. I think down to the 8-9 minute mark, it was basically back and forth, basically a 1-point game either way. And then Creighton goes on a little run to end the half. And then you had that very strange sequence to end the half where Creighton ends up shooting 5 consecutive free throws on a foul that I thought was a foul on Stephen Ashworth. It's not something that gets called all the time.
Of course it was.
It's not something that gets called all the time in that situation, but it was a pretty clear foul. And then you had the technical on Tominaga for throwing the ball at the stanchion. How much did you think that impacted the way the second half played out?
A little, but not that much. Nebraska doesn't have time to review this game. They really don't.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they got Minnesota coming up and then Michigan State. And by golly, they can win them both. And they can lose them both, too.
Mm-hmm.
And losing both would be like a punch to the gut. Winning both would be like, all right, everybody, let's look around at each other. Let's go. So they don't have time to review this game. And maybe that was by design, and maybe that's just a perfect thing for them.
Mm-hmm.
What I'll say is, yeah, the game was a 1-point game with 9 minutes to go. But everything about that game, the way Nebraska played it, the way Creighton played it, favored Creighton. You ain't going to get Keisei Tominaga scoring 32 points on runners and cutters to the lane. And that's just not happening. And so, I mean, everything about that game favored Creighton. The pace, Nebraska coming down and jacking up threes with, 6 seconds into the shot clock. I'm like, you got to play this game like Washington played Oregon in the Pac-12 championship game. You need to hold on to the ball. You need to slow the pace down. You can't give that team, run out after run out opportunity. It's Creighton. That nobody does that better than Creighton.
Mm-hmm.
At this point in college basketball, maybe Gonzaga does, but there aren't many teams that do it better than Creighton. And so it was like, are you like a practice team for them? Like, what are you doing? And so you got a point guard, and some of this is on Lauren. Yeah, you got to have a point guard that controls the basketball game and gets things in half court. And you got to go tell Casey. And remember, Casey didn't play much in the game last year. You got to go tell Casey, hey, this isn't the day. We're not playing the NBA today. We have to find a way to beat this team with our team, and that means you don't do what you like to do. You have to play within the construct of the offense that you're in, and that means you can pat yourself on the back for having 37 points at halftime, but the other team's going to have 52.
Mm.
And so Nebraska, I just don't think Nebraska played the kind of game that they needed to play to win the game. They needed to play the way they played last year, and they didn't. And then I also felt like, especially in the second half, I think Nebraska just didn't play very well. Creighton got cold. Creighton is a streaky shooting team. They did, Creighton was not hitting much in the second half, and Nebraska just didn't fight quite hard enough on the boards. And they, again, if you watch the game on TV, I thought Nick Baugh did a real nice job of kind of laying out the things that surprised him. And one of those things being that Baylor Shireman was able to cover Rink Mass a lot of the game. And that means that Mass didn't get the ball enough.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the challenges with the versatility and the number of guys that they play is making sure everybody on the floor knows who the hell's supposed to get the basketball. And if that's Rink Mass, then that's Rink Mass. Now, I'm not saying Rink's their best player. We had a really robust discussion last week before the rule presser of who Nebraska basketball's best player is. One guy said Bryce Williams. One guy said Matt. One guy said Casey. Casey's a wonderful player. Hard to build a team, or like hard to build a concept around him.
Yeah.
He goes and gets his 20, but that can't be your offensive identity. He's got to get his shots within the realm of the offense. And, I don't know what they're going to do. They got a big game Wednesday night against a team they don't match up well with. Minnesota, I know Nebraska won 2 of 3 from Minnesota last year, but they darn near could have lost all 3 of them. And Minnesota's got a guy, and Dawson Garcia, that Nebraska does not know how to cover. Or they didn't last year. So maybe they do this. Maybe Rink Mass can take him, or Alec, or somebody. But Minnesota's a challenge for Nebraska. And so they gotta go play that game, and they gotta go win it. And every single game they played against Minnesota has been kind of high scoring, and that doesn't favor Nebraska. So we'll see what happens. But that's what I thought coming out of the game, is I'm like, this is the way Creighton wants to play. And the only difference is Iowa made a bunch of those shots and lost. And Nebraska didn't make a bunch of those shots and lost by more than Iowa did. But if Iowa had missed those shots, it would have been the same result.
Yeah.
Like Iowa, but that's how Iowa wants to play. I
Yeah.
get it. And so that's Iowa's style. But you're not going to beat Creighton doing that. The teams that beat Creighton doing that, and Kalkbrenner is also healthy, are San Diego State and Colorado State. They slow the game down. They make each possession count. If you give Creighton a ton of possessions, which Nebraska did, especially in the first 10 minutes of the game when Creighton wasn't making many shots, Creighton's going to beat you. They're going to get deep enough into their shot bag, they're going to start making them. So I just thought it was kind of a failure on a lot of fronts. I was kind of surprised Nebraska played the way it did.
Sam McKewon from the Omaha World-Herald. Sam, really good stuff today. I appreciate you keeping me some company this morning, and we'll talk to you next week.
Take care.
That's Sam McKewon from the Omaha World-Herald. We appreciate Sam's time as always. Really good stuff there. We'll talk more about Creighton and Nebraska at the bottom of the show, as we catch up with our own Jacob Padilla from Hurrdat Sports. A little bit of, I guess, breaking news, as breaking as any of this stuff is with the transfer portal. Dylan Gabriel from Oklahoma, who had a very good year, leaving Oklahoma. It appears he is in the transfer portal and will be ready to play somewhere else next year. Want to remind you that Sam came to us on the Warhorse Sportsbook hotline. Warhorse Sportsbook, you can place your bets in person in Omaha at Horseman's Park or in Lincoln at the Warhorse Casino. You can place bets on nearly every major sporting event, straight bets, parlays, live in-game bets, props as well. You can do just about anything. You got to be in person at the casino or at Horseman's Park to place those bets. The best place in Nebraska to place your bets. That's Warhorse Sportsbook. No bets, no glory. Coming up next, Damon Benning.
We will be back. We will be back.
There's a lot of good teams. There's a lot of good teams out there. Florida State's certainly a good team. I really think that our team earned the right to be here.
We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
There's a lot of good teams out there. Florida State's certainly a good team, and to go undefeated in their league. And it's unfortunate that some good team had to get left out, but I really think that our team earned the right to be here.
We're halfway through the show here on Hurrdat Sports Radio. I'm Ravi Lulla, riding solo with you this morning from the Hurrdat Sports Bar and Grill, the H&H Chevrolet stage. We are on AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. Real quick before we get to DB, we need to talk about our Husker fans that are on your Christmas shopping list. Santa is making his list, checking it twice. You need to make it a little bit easier on our guy, Santa Claus. He's going to Alumni Hall. Alumni Hall is your one-stop shop to get all things Huskers. Gifts for him, gifts for her, gifts for the kids, even the dog. Alumni Hall has you covered. 2 great locations in Lincoln, downtown on P Street, also in South Point Pavilion. Or if you're like me, you like to do your shopping online, they have you covered at alumnihall.com. This week, get 20% off your Alumni Hall purchase with code UNLHoliday. That's all one word, UNLHoliday. No spaces, that's 20% off. So get your shopping done. Head to Alumni Hall. Use your code UNLHoliday to save some money on all your Husker gear and gifts. a guy that maybe I need to buy DB some Christmas gifts from Alumni Hawks. He never wears any Husker gear, DB.
Well, I turned over a new leaf. I've been collecting it.
Are you repping the brand now? You're finally on board?
Yeah. So like
what happened?
2 days and my kid committed.
Good reason. So you're switching out your West Side gear for Nebraska gear some of the days? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah. Like 2 days in a row. I wore some pretty slick combos, so I feel pretty good, man. One of the coaches was pretty shocked. He's like, "What? Rumor has it you don't wear Nebraska gear." And I said, "Oh, that's just a rumor. Since you guys have been in town the last year, I've kind of turned it." No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, I do. I wear it now.
I like it.
I've got a couple of new snazzy white quarter zips. I got another black hoodie. I mean, it's safe now. It's safe. It's weird because I don't mind. Like, it's fine, right? But I'm not this sounds crazy. Like I don't approach Nebraska like a fan.
Right.
Right. Like, but now this will challenge me a little bit. Like, will I be a fan?
See,
I don't know. I mean, I love them, right?
You
hate
that word. You hate that. Like, you hate the word fan when describing how you feel about Nebraska. But let's put some evidence on the table here. I'm going to do better than the College Football Playoff Committee here, and I'm going to use evidence. So
wow.
So let's see. You went to Nebraska, right? People know that about you,
Correct.
I think. So there's one in the fan category. You're an alum. Number two, you actively root for Nebraska to do well?
Correct.
You said it yourself. You love the university.
Correct.
Your son will be playing football there.
I hope so.
As far as we know.
Well, he's going to sign. I hope he plays at some point.
Okay. Your son will be on the football team at Nebraska. Whether he plays or not is still to be TBD.
Yeah, correct.
So, I mean, all things are pointing to fan, DB. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. I'm just, although
you kick back against the typical fan mentality. That's your big bugaboo.
Full disclosure, when Iowa had that pick and then ripped off the long run, I'm not kidding you. I kind of looked out the press box window to see how far of a drop it was. I don't really like joking about stuff like that, but I was like, is anybody going to catch me? Like, I was so miserable.
Yeah, that's some fan behavior.
It felt like a fan. Yeah, I felt like a fan.
I was sick to my stomach. I was nauseous when it happened.
When I went back and assessed it, I was like, well, fudge. A real fan wouldn't say what I'm about to say, right? Like, I wouldn't mind. It wouldn't bother me one bit playing like Iowa. Like, I could get up, I could look at myself every day in the mirror and be like, you know what? I'm not that good looking anyway. I don't mind winning ugly as long as I could win.
So you're saying you're okay if women like you for your personality? Is that?
Yeah. Oh God, he's such a nice guy.
He's got a great sense of humor.
I'd love to have the stones to trot out a walk-on kicker for a game winner.
Dude, how about that? That is crazy.
Or I don't know. I mean, there's just lots of things that my personality would embrace about being Iowa. So that's not a typical fan take, but I like winning, right? I said this yesterday. I was bothered by the lack of consistency with the transparency of the committee. And I said, I'll never talk bad about teams like Florida State or Iowa because they win. And they don't apologize for the way it looks.
Mm-hmm.
The great misnomer was, in '94 we were like this well-oiled juggernaut. No, I mean we were kind of ugly.
That was '95. '94 was a little Iowa-y, if we're being honest here.
Yeah, it was kind of ugly.
I remember a K-State third-string quarterback situation, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it was just It was clunky. It was messy. It was
Yeah.
trailing at the half against Wyoming at home. And so I learned to get over aesthetics a long time ago. So I mean, those parts of like the fan in me, like they aren't typical. They're probably atypical.
So you're feeling for Florida State a little bit this morning because they found a way to win in unfavorable circumstances, and I mean, kind of were punished for it, right?
Yeah, so I woke up yesterday, and I don't even know why I put anything on social media that was remotely going to spark this, because my timeline for the next 2 hours was incredible. But I start out with two basic things. I shouldn't have said it out loud, but whatever. I said, I'll be curious to see what consistency is shown with the team selections, because I figured everybody always talks about deserving versus best, but even best was gray. So I didn't love that if it was going to be skewed towards that. So I felt like, okay, let's just change deserving to one when it mattered.
Yeah.
Like, is that simple enough? Because that takes, well, we didn't have this quarterback, or they weren't playing well then, or they're playing better now. That takes all of that out of there. So then I felt like, okay, if we change deserving to just one when it mattered, then Florida State's probably got to be in.
Well, you look at it, right? Because when it matters, like Alabama goes into that Texas game knowing, like, hey, if we win this, we're in really good shape to make the college football playoff. Like, they know that the same way that they know when they go into Georgia, like, hey, we got to go win this game to be in the college football playoff. The same way Florida State, by the way, went and played LSU on a neutral field and said, hey, we got to win this one week one right out the gate to have a chance to do this thing we want to do.
Yeah, weren't they 2-0 against the conference?
They were 2-0 against the SEC. LSU, who they boat raced, by the way, and Florida, who didn't end up being very good. But still, the SEC would tell me that even they're not very good teams are good, because that's what I heard. One of these things is not like the other, right?
Yeah, so I don't want, and first of all, don't let anybody shame you for people being upset about the college football playoffs. I love the guys and gals that kind of get on their soapbox and are like, this is what happens, and death taxes and being mad about who's in the playoffs. That doesn't make it any less valid. Okay,
yeah.
So don't be one of those guys that's too cool to try to want betterment for the sport. Because when you go to 12, they had a chance to establish at least some sort of baseline for what they were looking for, but they still introduced the measure of eye tests and rationalizing. So I cringe when I hear people use the term best, because a lot of times that's subjective.
Yeah. No,
right?
It's always subjective. Best is always subjective.
Now, occasionally you'll get people to agree, okay, one or two teams said the best. You start getting the 12, I was like, you had a chance. You had a chance.
All right, DB, we're going to have a chance to continue catching up with you here after the break. We appreciate you sticking with us. We will get to more of DB here on Hurrdat Sports Radio on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities.
We will be back. will be back.
I want to say this. I mean, you talk about some of the. It's a galvanized team. Galvanized.
To earn a seat at the table, to be in this tournament is one that we're humbled by, but excited for as well.
We will be back. We will be back. You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
Wrapping up hour number 2 here on a Monday on Hurrdat Sports Radio. I'm Ravi Lulla, live on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. Reminder, game preparation and repetition predicts success and winning. Drivers and vehicle passengers who always use their seatbelts will increase their survival chances if a crash should happen. Make it click from the NDOT Highway Safety Office. I know a guy that believes in preparation and repetition, and he's joining me now back on the Warhorse Sportsbook Hotline. It is Old DB. Close your ears for a second. That's Damon Benning. I know you don't like to hear your name out loud, so I was trying to help you out there. But DB, what's going on, bud?
Oh man, some things haven't changed. It's all good. All good in the neighborhood.
So we were talking about the college football playoff, obviously, before the break there, and so my big issue here, right? Because if you want to penalize Florida State for the quarterback thing, I disagree, but I sort of get it. Shouldn't they have moved them down last week?
Well, that's one thing they could have done. You also could have some conviction. Listen, we just talked about, you kind of alluded to the SEC here a little bit with LSU and Florida, right? And we go about this every single year. Yes, the top 2-3 teams in the SEC are typically fantastic. The depth of the conference is not anything like
it's wildly overrated.
I'm overwhelmed with it,
Yeah.
and just look at the top 7 or 8 other teams that weren't in the SEC's record against the SEC. So this year, So it's like, okay, so your other alternative is to not buy into the narrative. Could you really have a college football playoff without the SEC champ? Like, I don't know. Is that really a thing? Is that really a thing where it's somehow written, well, it's the SEC. How about we just look at the quality of play? Because do you know what I heard yesterday? I heard this all morning. I thought it was hilarious. I heard Bama's argument being made at the fact that they beat Georgia. But in the very same vein, I heard that Georgia wasn't Georgia all year long and kind of stumbled their way along.
Mm-hmm.
So in my head, I was like, which is it? That's why you can't get into the best thing, because it's fairly subjective, right? Alabama just won by a miracle fourth down. But do you know what they said? Oh, it was a rivalry game. All bets are off. Yet we
found a way to win.
We used the same criteria against Georgia when we said they sleptwalk against Georgia Tech.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, are we even remotely listening to ourselves? So my thing was, the only way to take that out of it is to change deserving to they won when it counted, right? All things being equal. And you don't value conference strength. If you don't assume that the Big 12 is some little brother to the SEC, Texas beat Bama.
Mm-hmm.
So that puts Texas ahead of Bama, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, end of discussion.
Yeah.
And like Texas ahead of. Now, where it got gray, obviously, was with Bama and FSU and Georgia. I don't even know about Georgia, but I did find it interesting because I'm not making a case for Georgia. I'm making a case for consistency. So if you felt like Georgia was kind of the validation, then how are they the 6?
Yeah.
Because you felt bad enough to apologize to Norvell. I always love when people are like, hey, my heart goes out to, and, or that was a bad call, or they're going to issue an apology. No, you still lost. Like, you didn't get the spoils of being a victor. So I don't want to hear the back pats and we feel bad. And I'm like, you think Norvell cares? I mean, did you not see his statement?
Oh, I saw it.
You apologize to FSU, you say they're worthy, and you put them ahead of Georgia as the 5. You talk about like lack of consistency in the messaging. They're not good enough because you don't value their quarterback play to go undefeated, but you make them the 5 ahead of Georgia, who you use to validate Bama because they were the SEC champ. That part I was like, wow, that somebody's going to have to explain that one to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So,
there was some pretty aggressive mental gymnastics there to try and here's what I feel like happened. And you tell me if I'm crazy.
It's only going to get worse. That's why I wanted them. That's why I was curious to see, would they zero in on the competitiveness of when you played a team, because you know what it could have done? It could have encouraged tougher scheduling.
Yeah.
You had a chance to really make some statements yesterday with the committee, and I just felt like it kind of got away from them. Now we'll be back to when it's 12, it'll be best versus most deserving, and we'll do it all over again, and we'll argue from 8 through 12, right? Like that's what's going to happen next year.
Yeah. So what I thought happened with the committee was they probably felt like Bama was better than Texas, but they didn't feel like they could put Bama in since Texas beat them, which I
don't know. Do you look at Texas? Do you look at Bama and think they're better than Texas?
I don't necessarily, but I
don't.
I think that's what the committee was thinking. I think they looked at the two teams and thought, hey, we think Bama's better than Texas, which, by the way, is why the lack of criteria is really, really stupid, because you're just kind of eyeballing it and you don't really have any sort of hard metrics to base it on, except for, wins and losses, which they apparently ignored anyway.
Listen, and you're talking to a guy that only got one of the 4 playoff teams right when he started the season, right? That I picked Michigan.
Yeah.
But I did get my dark horse right, and that was Texas. I like Texas all year because of their physicality.
Yeah.
And that roster is ultra talented. Now, the team that I think people are sleeping on that's really good is Washington.
Yeah.
Like,
because they're way more physical than they get credit for.
Oregon would physically be able to kind of get after Washington.
Washington's way more physical than they get credit for.
Oh, hey. And so I guess at the end of the day, I love the fact that both games, it's 4.5 or less spreads. That's new and refreshing, right? So we figure the semifinals and finals could be tight. I like that. What I don't like is now we've just introduced more debate for next year by adding more teams. And keep in mind, you're talking to somebody that was always a fan of, before you expand, you need to set what the prerequisites are for the guest list. Don't just invite more people.
We had
if it's an
extensive arguments about this.
Right? If it's an exclusive party.
Yeah.
If it's an exclusive party.
What's the dress code? Tell me the dress code.
What's the dress code?
Yeah.
I just don't want more people to have fun.
The SEC gets to show up in jeans and everybody else has to show up in black tie. That's basically.
Everybody laughed at me. You got to expand. It's like, you better get some uniformity first. This will be even worse next year because we still haven't established the fact that we hold one conference in significantly higher regard than any other. And so they just operate under different rules.
For no particular reason, by the way. I mean, really.
But it would have been nice, like, if FSU had a really good relationship with their conference and their commissioner, because I think ultimately that didn't do them any favors. Hey, we're open for business. But you can't. I remember those, Steve. People forget that.
Yeah, I know.
They're exploring ways to get out of the conference. So,
and Jim's like, all right, I'm not helping you out then, bud.
Yeah, and I don't think he did.
But that's worse for his conference still, like it's still bad for it. Like it's biting your nose to spite your face, right? Like it's
100%. But if you're looking for criteria, I mean, you wanted a really bold move. You should have don't have Michigan in because you feel like they cheated. And if you don't feel like it was that big of an advantage, they sure did go to great lengths, right?
Yeah. They spent a lot of time and effort to do this thing that apparently didn't give them that much of an advantage.
I just think they sent a lot of mixed messages yesterday that's only going to convolute matters next year for 12. That's going to be a disaster.
We got about a minute left here, DB, before we let you go. Is there any part of you as someone who was relatively close to three-peating in college football, was there any part of you that was a little pleased that Georgia's not going to get that opportunity?
No, I didn't really look. I never,
because I was, if I'm being honest.
Not to go out Nick Bonacani on guys, but I was not popping champagne or cigars. I just, I want to be entertained for a competitiveness standpoint. So
sure,
I did feel like Georgia was one of the top 4 best teams in the country. They just lost at the wrong time. That's hard to explain to Georgia, because I think they did what is the hardest thing to do in sports: longevity and consistency over time. They became a victim of being their own benchmark.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's anything that they should apologize for. So, I mean, it's tough, but it happens. I'm just glad we get close games.
That's good old Damon Benning. DB, we appreciate you hanging out this morning, spending a little time with me, keeping me company while our guy Andrew is getting a little bit better, feeling a little bit better. So thank you, and we'll talk to you again soon, I'm sure.
All right, air dap, and hopefully Andrew feels better.
All right, buddy. Tell the family hi for me.
You got it.
That's our guy, DB, here on Hurrdat Sports Radio. Coming up next, Ryan Fowler from Bleacher Report. We've got more football here on Hurrdat Sports Radio.
We will be back. Sports Radio.
I want to say this. I mean,
we will be
we're humbled by, but excited for as well.
We will be back. We will be back. Welcome to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
I want to say this. I mean, you talk about some of the, it's a galvanized team. And, you know, some may think it's galvanized by adversity. It's not. It's galvanized by choice.
This has been a heck of a journey for us. And so to earn a seat at the table, to be in this tournament is one that you know, we're humbled by, but excited for as well.
Kicking off hour number 3 here on Hurrdat Sports Radio. I'm Ravi Lulla. We're on AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, and hour number 3 is on KFOR in Lincoln. If you're still trying to get up and ready to go this morning, make sure you get out to the Beanery to put a little pep in your step. 4 great Omaha area locations, Gretna, Papillion, Ashland, and 168th and Giles. They roast their own coffee, locally owned and operated. They've got hot and iced coffee, frozen specialty drinks, some breakfast sandwiches, muffins, even gluten-free and vegan scones. The Beanery, serving people coffee. Joining us now on the Warhorse Sportsbook Hotline is Ryan Fowler. He covers the NFL and college football for Bleacher Report. Ryan, how are you this morning?
I'm good. Appreciate you guys having me on.
Absolutely. We appreciate you joining us. Let's start with the NFL. I've been talking college football for about 2 hours nonstop here. So let's start with the NFL. Can you put into context for me what you saw last night in that, or yesterday afternoon, I should say, in that 49ers-Eagles game? And how impressive was that without, I guess, putting too much stock into just one regular season game?
Yeah, I think you absolutely have to put some stock into it, right? I think the 49ers on the road wanted to absolutely send a message to Philadelphia. All we've heard all year long is how good Philadelphia is, how good Jalen Hurts has played, the tush-push, everything along those lines. It's been all Philadelphia, right? And they go into that game and beat them by 20-plus in a hostile environment that is Lincoln Financial Field. Brock Purdy was efficient. The defensive line got after Jalen Hurts, made things tough. That third level, that Niners defense, people forget that they lost Talanoa Hufanga, who was a major piece to that defense. They lost Trey Greenlaw with that incident with the security guard in that first half. So the Niners seem to go into that environment. Now, again, like you said, you have to hold weight towards that, but there's never been a Super Bowl that's been won in December. So when we move forward into these next few months and we may see a rematch of these teams moving forward, it's going to be a heck of a battle, because I think now this is one of the more renewed NFC rivalries that we're going to see for the next 5-10 years potentially.
I know one of the big storylines yesterday coming out of this game, especially from the 49er side, was, hey, we told you if we had a quarterback, the NFC Championship game would have gone a lot differently. Do you buy into that?
I look at Kyle Shanahan's system, and I think you could throw maybe one of the best high school quarterbacks in the league. I'm kidding. But if you could, the efficiency that Brock Purdy operates with in this offense, whether they want to work you horizontally or whether they want to pick you apart vertically in the shallow areas or take deep shots to guys like Brandon Ayuk, or we saw last night with a guy like Jawan Jennings and beating guys in the open field, they can beat you in a multiplicity of ways. And when you got a guy like Christian McCaffrey running behind an offensive line like that has Trent Williams at left tackle, one of the best to ever do it in the sport of football, they can just beat you in so many different ways. And when you look at this Philadelphia defensive front, they have the big boys up front that they want to scheme off of, but then you got the back end to where they've been, in my opinion, they need to be more creative, specifically with their safety. You drafted Sidney Brown out of Illinois, and I'm not seeing him in the box or playing that multi-level defender that he did at Illinois. And that's where they ran into trouble yesterday with George Kittle. But with Brock Purdy running this offense, only 19 completions, 4 of them went for touchdowns. So you're not asking him to play hero ball. He's just being efficient.
We'll move on after this one, but the 49ers are kind of playing with an embarrassment of riches on that defensive line. How much of a factor do you think that will be in the postseason, where we've seen teams, if they can get pressure with 4, that might be all it takes to make a run to the Super Bowl?
Yeah, I think it's extremely important. And Nick Bosa, Chase Young, they weren't the big-time names that were productive yesterday. There's pressures there. I didn't see Chase a lot in that second half as their sparkly new addition at the deadline, but it really was Javon Kinlaw in the middle of that defense. And what makes that unit so special up front is what they allow the linebackers when Fred Warner and both Trey Greenlaw are on the field together, as, in my opinion, the best linebacker duo in all of football. So if you can get home with 4 and drop 7 consistently in coverage in the NFL today, where they just want to sling around 40, 45 times, it just makes life easier on everybody at every single level.
We're talking with Ryan Fowler of the Bleacher Report. What is your level of concern with the Kansas City Chiefs and their, I guess, sometimes inability to get that offense going? I mean, we know the issues with the receiving room. But a lot of times this year we have seen them struggle to put points on the board. What's your level of concern there?
Yeah, I think Patrick Mahomes at times, as special as he is as an athlete, and I don't think anybody else will say there's a better quarterback in football right now over the last couple of years. It's just sometimes playing too much hero ball for me, trying to do too much in too many certain times to where it's a 3rd and 5 and he's scrambling around for 5-6 seconds, to where you watch him in years prior and he's just dropping back, making 1 or 2 reads, and the guy is maybe not separating enough, or just throw a guy open. And there is no more Tyreek Hill on the outside. We all understand that, but we talked about that last year, and they go and win the Super Bowl. But teams, I think, right now are focusing more on 87, and that is Travis Kelce. Now, granted, still almost got 100 yards yesterday, but who else is around him? And they made additions in Sky Moore and Rashee Rice, and they have some other names that they brought in, like Richie James. But those guys just haven't stepped up at all. And as good as Patrick is under center, at some point you have to ask those guys to at least get a little bit of separation to help Patrick Mahomes out, to where he doesn't have to make a perfect throw every single time. And that's where it comes down for me right now, where I'm not gonna count out Patrick Mahomes as long as he's in Kansas City, similar to how we thought about Tom Brady when he was in New England. I'm not gonna count him out when it comes down to it. But these guys on the outside have to help him out a little bit, other than Travis Kelce. Well,
speaking of Tyreek Hill, his new team 9-3 dominated yesterday against a not very good Commanders team. But do you look at the Dolphins as the class of the AFC?
I think they are right up there, but I do think that this offense could potentially be the class of the AFC. It is unbelievable. I mean, you got your Lamborghinis, your McLarens, your Ferraris in the form of Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Devon Achane, and then you got Raheem Mostert as well, who are all they're former track athletes, but there's a big stigma that surrounds track athletes putting up the track spikes in football players, and they're hell of football players, all 4 of those guys, and they're just fantastic with what they do what they ask Tua to do in this offense. Because the main question this year was, is Tua going to be able to stay healthy, and are we going to see the best version of this Miami offense? And I think we are. And they put up 70 earlier in the year. And I know they've been beaten up on bad teams, and this next month of the season is really going to be tested. But man, you watched that offense yesterday, to where if Washington had any chance to keep that game close, this team puts up probably 60 points. Tyreek Hill, 130 yards in the first half. No one can cover him. I don't think anybody can cover him. Washington really broke one of the 10 commandments in football, running man against Miami. You just don't do it. You just don't do it. So Miami, I think they are the class of the AFC offensively. I'm just interested to see how that front 4 on defense steps up with the loss of Jalen Phillips.
As you look around the AFC, we talked about the Chiefs, we talked about the Dolphins. We also talked about the 49ers and the Eagles in the NFC. Do you look at the AFC and see anyone that you think is on that level that you think can be competitive against the NFC in the Super Bowl?
I really like Baltimore. I really do. Their defense right now is the best in football, and it's just looking at Lamar Jackson in this offense. How much can he do? Because he can win with his arm and he can win with his leg. The big stigma around him is he's a running back playing quarterback. Well, he's proven that he can throw the football. However, similarly what Travis Kelce offers to Patrick Mahomes, losing Mark Andrews is going to be huge for this Baltimore offense, because they've tried to make additions on the perimeter. Rashad Bateman, Zay Flowers has been an excellent first-round pick out of Baltimore, out of Boston College, but he's been banged up a little bit too. So it's who steps up around Lamar on offense, and if they do, I think they absolutely have a chance to get to the Super Bowl this year and potentially win the whole thing, because they are special on defense.
Just a little bit more here on the NFL before we switch over to college. The Patriots fall to 2-10 with that super bizarre game against the Chargers yesterday. Was that a game of 2 head coaches that are not going to be there next year?
It could be, and it's crazy to say that about Bill Belichick, considering the success that he's had over the last couple of decades. But both those teams look completely inept in all 3 phases of the game. And a lot of people forget that the Chargers even drafted a guy like Quentin Johnson in the first round. It just has not worked out for them. Justin Herbert, that offense, the defense that they got, they're way too talented to be 5-7 and to win a football game 6-0 to where they didn't even score a touchdown. I completely agree with you. I think both coaches are I'm going to say Staley's more likely to go than Bill Belichick because of the relationship he has with ownership there.
Sure.
But what an ugly ball game that was in New England, where we saw Ezekiel Elliott run for 50 yards and really be the most dynamic player in that entire football game, which was pretty embarrassing, and if you ask me.
Do you think there's a chance that Bill Belichick is coaching the Chargers next year?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so. I think right now I potentially see Bill Belichick holding out and being the potential next coach of New England next year with getting a fresh new quarterback in the building because it hasn't worked out with Mac Jones or Bailey Zappi. They even activated Malik Cunningham yesterday if he had to come in. Just hasn't worked out for them. So I don't expect him in LA. Maybe we see him in New England. Maybe he gets another shot with a fresh new quarterback under center in the form of Drake May or Caleb Williams. We'll see.
We're talking with Ryan Fowler of Bleacher Report. All right, let's switch gears over to college football. Not that there was anything too crazy that happened yesterday. Oh, wait, a Power 5 undefeated team got left out of the college football playoff. What did you make of the committee's decision to leave Florida State out? And I guess what would you have done in that situation?
Can't do it. You just can't hold out Florida State. We talk about results, and if Jordan Travis was that important to this Florida State offense to where they keep him out as, again, undefeated Power 5 team, then he deserves to win the Heisman, if you ask me. So
yeah,
you just cannot do it because you watch this defense play against a excellent Louisville offense and hold them to – they were just inept on offense, winning games with a backup quarterback and a third-string freshman quarterback. The defense was dominant. Everyone stepped up when they needed to. And when Jordan Travis was there, they're the only team in college football other than Alabama that has a top 10 pick on defense in Jared Verse and offense in Keon Coleman. So from a talent perspective, they are one of the most loaded teams in football. But then you look at their results, and I feel like the results have to matter here. We're not talking about rankings or what the money's going to be in the business side of things for college football, because that's the way I think Alabama is at 4. And it's unfortunate that Jordan Travis got hurt. But you cannot keep a 13-0 undefeated Power 5 team. I know the ACC, in the grand scheme of things, is probably considered dead for some people. It was really Florida State and Clemson heading into the year. But overall, you just cannot do it. Now, these games, I think are going to be interesting. These semifinal matches are going to be fun. But just from the basis of things, you flat out cannot do it.
Could I make the argument to you that the perception of the SEC as this juggernaut from top to bottom of teams that are just far and away better than everyone else is more myth than fact? Like, yes, they're very good at the top, but it doesn't look like, to me at least, the middle and bottom of the SEC is any different than most other leagues. Am I crazy, or can I make that argument?
No, you're not crazy at all. I completely agree with you. I mean, 2 weeks ago, the prayer of Jordan Hare doesn't happen, and we're not talking about Alabama. And that Auburn team
is not very good. They're not very good.
Exactly. And Alabama barely beat Arkansas, and they struggled earlier with a team like UAB. So this Alabama team was by no means the Alabamas of old. And the SEC as a whole was not the SEC of old, because the Pac-12, the now defunct, extinct Pac-12, was the best conference in football, in my opinion, this year. And Washington absolutely deserved to potentially be the number 1 seed in this entire thing, because there's a lot of questions about who Michigan played and beat as well, outside of course, Penn State and Ohio State. But I completely agree with you. The SEC as a whole this year was drastically below average, and you have to take this on a year-by-year basis. And it's just I just don't know why Alabama's at 4.
Yeah, I mean, I really don't know that I see a huge difference between, Louisville, Clemson, North Carolina, NC State, and Missouri, Tennessee, Ole Miss, LSU, right? Like, because that's the section of the conferences we're talking about. Like, Missouri and Louisville, pretty comparable. Tennessee and like an NC State or North Carolina, pretty comparable. You can make an argument that Clemson is the most talented team out of that entire group of, 8 or so, whatever I named. The perception that the conference put out there, the Sesame Street, one of these things is not like the other, I think is just made up.
No, I agree with you. And I think the bottom line, when we look forward into this thing this year with 4 teams, I'm excited for next year where there's 12. Now, for some people, that may be too much, but I think it's the perfect number to where football, you got to line up at the end of the day. It is not spreadsheet football. You can't look at a depth chart and say that team's going to beat this team, because right now, if we had it this year, we would have seen Liberty face Florida State. Now, the talent discrepancy is big. However, Liberty's got some NFL players on either side of the ball that can play some football for you. So I just think it's going to be really fun moving into next year and the years following, where we get 12 teams to where anything can happen. More football, in my opinion, is always the best when it comes to college perspective.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not too much for me. I was advocating for 16, and I still think they probably end up getting to 16 at some point, unless, we have the Power 5 Super League break off at some point. But I do think a 16-team playoff would have been my preferred method there. I guess going back to the SEC for just a second here, how much of an issue do you have with the fact that they do play fewer conference games than everyone else? And like, how much of an advantage is that, do you think, where, they throw in a Chattanooga or whoever in the middle of November to kind of even out their schedule?
Yeah, it's more so you look at it from an Alabama's perspective, even Georgia's perspective. I think people are overlooking in this process. It's unbelievable that they're not even 5, they're 6. And these rankings, it's a cupcake schedule out of conference. And then if you win 1 or 2 of your major games, you're automatically in it. Back to your question earlier about the SEC bias. And that's where really it comes down to it for me. There is truly, absolutely, you cannot look at this playoff specifically and not say that there is an SEC bias. I want SEC teams to play more of each other. If they're that big and bad of a conference, even though they got 2 more teams next year coming in, continue to play each other and leave out the Chattanoogas or University of Wisconsin, Alabama, of Pennsylvania. Leave those teams out. Play more of each other and really show who the cream of the crop is. If you have, the SEC with 4 stars and 5 stars everywhere.
Ryan, of the teams that actually did make the college football playoffs, we've got Michigan, Washington, Texas, Alabama. What are your initial thoughts of how that could possibly play out?
I think the first semi, Washington and Texas, I think that 2-3 matchup is going to be fantastic. Now, it may be a behind the barn 45-40 type of matchup. We know Big 12 defenses like Texas, they don't really like to play a lot of defense. It could be an old Red River showdown with them in Oklahoma we've seen over the years. But Quinn Ewers and Michael Penix going at it, I think that's going to be a really fun matchup. Michigan and Alabama, you look at Michigan's roster, they have contrasting styles on offense and defense, where their offense is from 1980s where they want to run at you, but they've lost guard Zach Zinser, who's going to be a major loss for them in the middle. You kind of saw it in that Big Ten title game, against Iowa. But on defense, they have the talent to counter guys like Jermaine Burton on the outside and linebackers to run sideline to sideline if Jalen Milroe wants to escape outside the pocket. So for me, the most exciting matchup in the semis is going to be Washington and Texas. Michigan and Alabama may be that slow, methodical 20-10, 17-14 type of matchup. But I think both matchups are going to be really fun to watch, specifically not only for the CFP, but for draft fans out there as well.
Do you think there's a clear favorite to win the title? Because out of those 4 teams, you kind of just went over it there. I think there's strengths and weaknesses on every single roster there. I don't think you can look at this 4 and say this team is for sure the best. Is there a team that you're leaning toward?
There isn't. There absolutely isn't. I think all 4 teams are pretty equal. I think you can have concerns like pros and cons you could balance with each of these 4. I think it's going to be a battle to the end for both of these games. All offenses can score and all defenses have players at all 3 levels. And I think it's going to come down to coaching. I think it's going to come down to execution in certain down situations to where you're going to have to execute. And that's really what we haven't seen it a bunch in these last 2 years of college football playoffs, to where the semis where it's Ohio State against Notre Dame or Clemson Notre Dame. No shots to the Fighting Irish out there in South Bend, but every time they show up in the CFP, it's usually a boat race. But all 4 of these teams are really talented on either side of the ball, and I think we're going to get good games out of all these. But I don't have a favorite right now.
Ryan, real quick before we let you go here, you mentioned, if Jordan Travis was that important to Florida State that they get left out, then he should win the Heisman. I don't think he will, but you look at the kind of candidates. Who do you think is the most deserving player of the Heisman this year?
For me, it's Jaden Daniels at LSU. And I think when I finalize my QB board this draft cycle, I think he's going to be QB3 behind Drake May and Caleb Williams. I think you look at what he's done this year at LSU, another one of those transfers right in from Arizona State where people forget that he was even there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it was nice having Malik Neighbors on the outside and Brian Thomas Jr. Both those guys are going to be drafted this year and high at that. But his legs and the arms, and he kept LSU in football games to where LSU's defense was abysmal. They were one of the worst units, not only in the SEC, but in all college football as well. They were bad on the defensive side of the football. But Jaden's special. I mean, first guy since Johnny Manziel over a decade ago to throw for 3,000 yards, and rush for 1,000 or more. He is my Heisman winner, and I think he's also going to be able to translate that to the next level and be a dynamic athlete on Sundays for some teams.
Could I make the argument that Michael Penix and what he was able to do at Washington deserves consideration over the 3-loss Jaden Daniels at LSU?
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, you watch Michael Penix and the big throws he made in that Pac-12 title game, and it's nice having guys on the outside like Rome Odunze, but I'm gonna be really interested to see how he performs if they potentially meet a Michigan or an Alabama in the final, and those teams take away a guy like Rome Odunze, because I don't think Texas will. They have talent on the defensive front, but Michigan with Will Johnson and Alabama with a guy like Kool-Aid McKinstry and Malachi Moore, they will take away a guy like Rome Odunze. So Jalen Polk and Jalen McMillan, those are the guys that are going to have to step up, but Michael Penix has been a really nice evaluation since coming over from Indiana, to where at times he was unplayable there for the Hoosiers.
Where does Michael Penix fall on your quarterback board?
He's probably going to be QB4.
Okay, right after Daniels?
Right behind Jaden Daniels, yeah. Yep.
Is there anyone on that QB? Sorry, I'm a big NFL draft nerd. Is there anybody on that QB board that would surprise me?
I don't think so. I think it's all the popular names. I like Bo Nix probably a little bit more than others.
Okay.
He's right there alongside Michael Penix for me. J.J. McCarthy is more of that efficient type of Brock Purdy talent, in my opinion, where if he falls in an offense that will work around him and ask him to play that hero ball and be the supreme athlete that we sometimes ask quarterbacks to be, what we've seen at times from Bryce Young in Carolina, he's right there in that mix. But there's a clear tier for me at the top with Caleb Williams, Drake May. Then it's Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix, Michael Penix, J.J. McCarthy, and then we'll go down from there.
What do you do with Jordan Travis with his kind of unique skill set and the injury?
Yeah, I really like Jordan Travis coming into the year. Remember, I was on a Florida State podcast before the season, and I picked Florida State to win the ACC, and I picked them to actually be in the CFP. And it just stinks to see the injury for Jordan. But his evaluation as a prospect hasn't changed too much for me. Just watching his game and what do you think he's going to be when he's healthy at the NFL level. There's still concerns with his arm strength, his ability to process. Really fun outside the pocket, but the height will scare some teams. So can he see over the offensive line at the next level? That's a big concern for some scouts and personnel I've talked to in the draft process. So he's going to be someone I think deserves an opportunity. I don't think he's a starter right away, but absolutely you got to come in as a potential QB2 that can be a change of pace guy with his legs if you need to be. I think he absolutely deserves an opportunity somewhere.
You think he could kind of replicate a Colin Kaepernick role?
I think he could. I think it's a good fit. I think it's a good little prospect comparison. Absolutely. I don't think he has the arm
right.
talent of Colin Kaepernick, but just the legs, the leadership, I think that matters. The ability to just lead an NFL offense. I think lead an NFL offense. I think I absolutely could do that.
Ryan Fowler from the Bleacher Report. Ryan, we're going to have you back on to talk about more draft stuff, but appreciate your time for sure, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
That's Ryan Fowler from the Bleacher Report. Coming up next, it's time for the Warhorse Sportsbook Sports Cleanup here on Hurrdat Sports Radio.
We will be back. 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 You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio. Things you wanted us to get to from the weekend, but we didn't.
Cleanup on aisle 6.
It's the Sports Cleanup.
Welcome into the Hurrdat Sports Radio Warhorse Sportsbook Sports Cleanup here on AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, and KFOR in Lincoln. Lots of stuff to get to that we just haven't had a whole lot of time to address yet today. First and foremost, want to give a shout out to both Nebraska and Creighton volleyball on reaching the Sweet 16. Creighton did so in impressive fashion. Obviously, Nebraska did as well. Nebraska will face Georgia Tech here in a few days. They were able to advance out of their own region, their little pod. They'll stay in Lincoln, which is good for them. They beat LIU and then Missouri as well. They play, as I mentioned, Georgia Tech on Thursday, and then the winner of Kentucky, Arkansas will play the winner of Nebraska, Georgia Tech with a spot on the line to go to the Final Four. That will be on Saturday. Creighton will no longer be at home. They hosted in their opening round games at DJ Sokol Arena, where they swept Colgate and Minnesota. They will play Louisville on Thursday at 11 a.m. That is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Creighton dominant, 3-0 in their 2 matches. Nebraska dominant as well, 3-0 in their 2 matches. So the state's remaining 2 Division I teams in the NCAA volleyball tournament are both headed to the Sweet 16 with aspirations of much more on the line. For Creighton, kind of broke a little tough streak in the NCAA tournament. They had not made the Sweet 16 since 2016, I believe. They had a little rough stretch of not getting out of that second round. Coach Booth and company were able to break through against a very solid Minnesota squad and reach the Sweet 16. So congratulations to Coach Cook in Nebraska, Coach Booth at Creighton, and everybody in the state of Nebraska who enjoys volleyball, as Nebraska still has 2 teams alive and well in the NCAA tournament. Another thing that I wanted to get to just real quickly here, Quentin Newsome enters the NFL draft. So he will be moving on from Nebraska. Not a surprise there.
Q does?
Yep.
He's out?
He's moving on, which I think it would have been his COVID year, so I don't think very many people expected him to come back. But he is entering the NFL draft. As far as I can tell, and I've been trying to keep an eye on this as closely as possible, no other significant Huskers planning to leave with eligibility on the table. We already heard about Ty Robinson coming back. We already heard about Ben Scott coming back. Those are 2 big names to retain for Nebraska. The only guys that I'm seeing in the portal so far are reserve tight end John Goodwin and defensive back Javier Morton. Those are the 2 that appear to be transferring. No other, and those are no offense to these guys, but they are not players of consequence for this Nebraska roster. The rest are either eligibility. You got a couple guys retiring for health reasons. Nick Henrich, Ty Hahn. It's not a health reason for Ty Hahn. He's just married and going to go farming, as we found out last week. Blaze Gunnarsson is a health issue as well. So
nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, listen, he's just Ty Hahn. He's engaged and going to go farming.
Sounds like a pretty good life right there.
Hey, there's certainly worse ways to spend your time.
I'm not kidding either. It sounds great.
I know. I mean, you're an Iowa kid at heart, right? You got that.
I grew up on the farm.
Yeah, you grew up on the farm, so you appreciate that. I grew up right here in Omaha, so I don't know that I'd do well on a farm long term. But Ty Hahn moving on with his life, so good stuff there. But that's good news for Nebraska, at least so far. The portal's open, and as Coach Rule kind of indicated, don't expect a lot of guys to hop in there. I do expect Jeff Sims to move on at some point, whether that's, I would imagine he's going to transfer. I don't know that the NFL draft route is right for him at this point, just based on the season he had. But I wouldn't expect Jeff Sims to be on the roster next year, but who knows? We'll see. We've talked a lot about college football here today. We've talked a lot about NFL football with Ryan Fowler there. I'm really having a hard time figuring out who beats either the 49ers or Eagles. And after last night, I guess the 49ers mostly. I'm having a real hard time figuring out who beats the 49ers on their way to a Super Bowl. And that's not just because I'm a 49ers fan. That's a dominant team. They did have a 3-game losing streak, so they're not unbeatable. But that is a really, really good football team. They are second in point differential in the NFL, ironically enough, to the Dallas Cowboys, who are at plus 168. The 49ers are at plus 163. If there is only a couple other teams above the plus 100 mark. One of them was mentioned by Ryan Fowler, the Baltimore Ravens, plus 137. They were on a bye this week. They're a really good football team. I do worry about Lamar Jackson's ability to win with his arm without Mark Andrews available to him. I think he provides a lot of the same security that Travis Kelce provides to Patrick Mahomes. And obviously, Lamar Jackson is not the thrower of the football that Patrick Mahomes is.
Do you gear up after your team wins, like the championship? Like, are you going to gear? I mean, if the 49ers win the Super Bowl, are you going to come in with new gear?
I might get a hat. I think I've started leaning more hat away from T-shirts. I don't wear a ton of like graphic T-shirts anymore. That's to say T-shirts with graphics, not T-shirts that are graphic, like offensive. I've never really worn a lot of those.
Hats look a little better on the shelf too.
Yeah, I kind of hang them up on my wall, the hats and everything. I would probably get something. I don't know what. I've gotten those. Like there was a Red Sox World Series that I got, like a commemorative baseball.
Okay.
So I would think about something like that. I would get something. I don't know what it would be. I'm not going to go crazy and, buy all the on-field merch and stuff like that. But, yeah, I would get something. They haven't won one since I was a kid in 94. So, it's a pretty big deal. I think I'd get something. That's almost 30 years.
That's quite a bit, yeah. That's cool.
I geared up a lot when the Red Sox won in 2004. I got the T-shirt. I got the hat. I got a bunch of stuff.
You get the DVD. You get all that.
Oh, yeah. So that was one of my favorite Christmas presents ever, was getting the box set of DVDs of the entire ALCS.
Oh, wow.
And World Series.
And the World Series,
of the 2004 Red Sox. And it was, at the time, it was expensive. It was like $150 or something. And I think like my whole family was like, okay, this is kind of from all of us because we didn't typically spend that much money on each other for Christmas. So
is this a Sports Illustrated thing?
I don't know who put it out, but I watched those DVDs endlessly when I was younger. All the time. I used to fall asleep watching like
Game 4 of the World Series.
So Game 4 and Game 5 of the ALCS, actually, because those were the longer games that the Red Sox would they won in 12 and 14 innings respectively. And so I would fall asleep watching those games. So the DVD sets I did like those, but now you can find games everywhere now. The DVDs aren't as big of a deal anymore.
YouTube and
that's true. All those games are on YouTube now. I've actually
or
watched
whatever network. If you have the NLB, I'm sure it's probably on their network somewhere.
Absolutely. So yeah, I would get some gear. I would get something if the 49ers won, but we'll see. We'll see. We're a long way from that, but at this point in the season, doesn't look like there's a whole lot of teams to stand in their way. That is the Warhorse Sportsbook Sports Cleanup. Coming up next, we're going to talk to Jacob Padilla about some basketball, some volleyball, everything else here on Hurrdat Sports Radio.
We will be back. We will be back.
And their leading scorers starting to heat up here at PBA. And this was a dominant performance by Greg McDermott's team. And the Blue Jays with a 29-point victory against Nebraska.
This is a really good win.
Point victory against Nebraska. 29.
We will be back. We will be back. You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
Shireman lets it go. His third triple of the first half. And their leading scorers starting to heat up here at PBA. And this was a dominant performance by Greg McDermott's team. And the Blue Jays with a 29-point victory against Nebraska.
Wrapping up the show here on a Monday. I'm Ravi Lulla. We're on AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, and KFR in Lincoln. Hurrdat Sports Radio is brought to you by Dyer Law. If you have been hurt in a personal injury accident, you can count on the Dyer Law team to provide you with a helping hand when you need it. No matter what you're dealing with, call the Dyer Law team at 402-393-7529 or visit dyer.law to chat with trusted professionals about your personal injury claim. That's DYER.law. Joining us now is our friend Jacob Padilla of Hurrdat Sports. Jacob, how are you this morning?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
I assume you're doing even better because of the way that Creighton performed yesterday against Nebraska. People forget you are a Creighton alum and you cover the Jays now again where you belong. How would you rate Creighton's performance yesterday? Because despite the final score, I didn't think that was more than like a B+ game from them. Am I crazy?
Yeah, no, I was going to say B. I know Shireman wasn't happy with his own performance because he wanted that 30-piece with a few of those rim outs in the second half. He was frustrated by that. But, yeah, I mean, they did a good job of settling in, and they kind of went on the typical run that we've seen in every game but one this year to end that first half. And then in the second half, their defense stepped up and kind of took over when the offense started slowing down. So it wasn't necessarily a complete performance, but because, I mean, you look at what their best players, like the guard court, the starting guards, did not shoot great overall between the three of them. But the role players were efficient with their opportunities, and Nebraska shot under 35% from the field.
Jacob, I'm glad you brought up the defense for Creighton, because I know that's something that people have looked at this year and said, hey, maybe that's a place they take a step back. And I kind of get what they're saying there. But Nebraska had been pretty good offensively, and especially what Creighton was able to do to them in the second half. Like, that has to be pretty impressive, right?
Yeah, I mean, Nebraska was a top 25 offense coming into this.
Yeah.
And this performance vaulted Creighton up to 10th in adjusted defensive efficiency on KenPom. I think they were around like 21st, 22nd, somewhere in that range. They were in top 25, but like that's like a solid 10-spot jump, something like that, from one game, which kind of shows the respect that the numbers at least had for what Nebraska had done offensively so far this season. And Keisei Tominaga had a good first half, but outside of that, they really kept everybody else in check. Nobody else played well offensively. And Tominaga slowed down in the second half. They kind of got they got him under control. So really impressive performance. The 2 for 22 from three certainly helped.
Sure.
But Greg McDermott said a lot of those 22 threes were the threes that Creighton wanted them to take, and not necessarily the ones that Nebraska wanted to take. And so that really is the between not fouling, which Nebraska, that was the key in this game, because Nebraska had basically more than double their opponent in free throw rate on the season heading into this one. They had a huge advantage at the free throw line in almost every game they played this year. And Creighton obviously is best in the country at not fouling. So that was going to have to give one way or the other. And Creighton certainly won in that regard. And then in the 3-point game, Creighton's been really good at taking away 3-point opportunities for teams, even though that teams that hit them, I believe like a 35% rate or so against them. So they had knocked them down at a decent percentage, but they weren't able to get off many good looks because of the way that Creighton has been defending. And that was certainly the way it played out on Sunday as well.
We're talking with Jacob Padilla of Hurrdat Sports. Jacob, you've obviously watched this Nebraska team a ton, covering them in years past, and obviously just being part of the college basketball local community here. How would you build a team and an offense around Keisei Tominaga being your best offensive player? Because I think it's maybe more of a unique challenge than people realize.
And that was the problem. Honestly, the way they did at the end of last year looked pretty good. And it's through playing like through the high post with the big man, like we saw with Derek Walker last year, because he's not necessarily a great on the ball player. Although, I mean, you look at what he did against Creighton, like he only hit 1 3.
Yeah.
A lot of it was kind of off the bounds in that pick and roll game against that drop. He's actually improved significantly in that. And I think that's probably some of the 3x3, the international experience coming in there, as he's continued to work on his game and get chances to expand it. But he's not necessarily a lead guard that's going to run a bunch of pick and rolls and go create his shot consistently. He's a really good off the ball cutter, though. Obviously, he's good coming off screens, coming off handoffs. So I think the key is you just run a lot of actions involving him, get him a lot of different chances to to get different looks at, because he can score in a lot of different ways. But for that, you need someone that can really attract the defense's attention and initiate. And that's where they really struggled against Creighton, is nobody else played well. That Creighton game was kind of like Creighton's Colorado State game, and that is like, well, really nothing we try is working right now. Nobody's got it. And the defense that Creighton played, shutting down Rink Mast, Bryce Williams in particular, those two had played really well recently. And Juwan Gary, for the first time all season, he failed to get double digits. And wasn't really a factor on the glass at all, only played 24 minutes. So they've been a really balanced offense to this point, where it wasn't, all right, Casey, go be our guy. And it kind of had to be that on Sunday because of the way that Creighton defended them.
Jacob, I think yesterday showed some of the places where Nebraska misses a Derek Walker the most in not being able to take advantage as much of Ryan Kalkbrenner the way they did last year. Do you think Casey suffers as much as anyone from not having Derek Walker on the team this year?
Not really. Like I said, Casey's played really well, actually. And he was, about 15 a game on 50-40 shooting. Honestly, I think Ryan Kalkbrenner being healthy made it tougher for Nebraska to take advantage of him. Creighton had a really good game plan defensively. They changed some things slightly just based on the personnel Nebraska has. And I think, honestly, the biggest problem with this game was Rink Mast and Josiah Alec. I mean, Alec had only attempted 5 threes, but he had hit 2 of them. Rink has had a few games this year where he's hit 2 3 threes. And against the drop, those opportunities were going to be there. And they just couldn't hit them. Creighton dared those guys, Juwan Gary, to hit threes. And they shot a combined 1 for 11 between the three of them. So that was, I think, Derek Walker obviously played really well last year and attacked Kalkbrenner in some unique ways. But, I mean, you look at Kalkbrenner, start of the game, they put Kalkbrenner on Alec so that he could kind of play off him and be more at help. And they had Baylor Shireman and Mason Miller and Isaac Trout and those guys kind of the primary defender on Mast. And I thought we might see something like that just because kind of the funky matchups there with the way that their two front courts play. But those guys did a good job of fighting and battling Mast and preventing him from getting some easy inside touches. And the threes didn't fall as well.
Jacob, real quick, got about a minute left here. Want to switch gears to volleyball. Nebraska and Creighton both advancing to the Sweet 16. I think obviously most people expect Nebraska to go to the Final Four, maybe even win the national championship. How realistic do you think a Final Four goal is for Creighton, though?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't watched a ton of ACC volleyball, and by that I basically mean none. So I know Louisville has had a great season and Pitt on the other side of that, but we're talking 1, 2, 3 seed, and the improvement that Creighton has made throughout the season, having to navigate the injuries, has led to some of their other players really growing up and becoming an even more dangerous part of the team. So with a setter like Kendra Waite and the pins that she has to throw to pass to, and the improvement kind of the other players have made, Creighton's got as good a shot as anybody. I mean, they're going to be underdog going on the road, but I think they've got a chance. That match against Louisville on Thursday should be a lot of fun. And if they can get through that, I mean, Louisville's probably about on the same level as Pitt. So you can win that first one, then should be able to win the second as well.
Jacob Padilla from Hurrdat Sports. Jacob, we appreciate your time as always. We'll talk to you again soon.
All right, sounds good.
Want to remind you, we're brought to you by Dingman's Collision Center. Dingman has been in business in Omaha for over 25 years and has been best of Omaha, first place 18 years running, 4 great Omaha area locations. And they have the latest technology to work on any make and model. They also give back to the community with every car repaired. Go to dingmans.com for more information. That's the show for the day. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you tomorrow.